watching Shalom TV, celebrating Jewish culture. Funding for Shalom TV has been provided by the following. And by viewers like you.
Jewish Education in Media is pleased to present L'Chaim, a program that highlights the people, issues, and events of importance to the Jewish community. Now here is your host, Rabbi Mark Golub.
In the month of April 1961, one of the monsters most responsible for implementing Adolf Hitler's final solution to liquidate, to exterminate the Jewish people from the face of the earth, that man was put on trial. The trial of Adolph Eichmann began April 11th, 1961, at Beit Ha'am, then a new auditorium in downtown Jerusalem. Eichmann had been captured by the Israeli Mossad as he returned home one night by bus from his job as foreman of a Mercedes-Benz company in Buenos Aires, Argentina. He'd been flown out of the country, drugged and disguised as part of an El Al crew in May of 1960. 11 months later, he was brought to a court and placed in a bulletproof glass booth, listening to the testimony of nearly 100 Holocaust survivors through earphones. Eichmann was indicted on 15 criminal charges. The trial was presided over by 3 judges, Moshe Landau, Benjamin Halevi, and Yitzhak Raveh. The chief prosecutor was the late Gideon Hausner, then Israel's Attorney General, and Gideon Hausner's deputy in that trial was a 34-year-old Jew who'd escaped the Holocaust to build a life in Israel by the name of Gabriel Bach. Gabriel Bach went on to an illustrious career, ultimately becoming a judge on the Israeli Supreme Court, where he served until his retirement in 1997. Currently, Gabriel Bach serves as a judge of the Army Court of Appeals. And we are honored now to have Justice Bach on our phones from Jerusalem. Justice Bach, thank you so much for joining us.
Good day to you. Very pleased to be able to be at your service.
Justice Bach, I'm interested in your speaking about the significance of the Eichmann trial as we look back upon it. And I guess I want to begin by asking you simply if you remember the mood that permeated Israel in those days back in 1961.
Yeah. Well, I was at the time the deputy state attorney of Israel, and my first memory was when I heard on the radio that our prime minister had told the country through our parliament, the Knesset, that Eichmann was caught, that he was in Israel and they would stand justice. That was it had an electrifying effect all over the country, and also I had that impression. And then 2 days after he was brought to Israel, the Minister of Justice called me and asked me whether I would be prepared to be the legal advisor of the police bureau that was entrusted with conducting the investigation against Eichmann. I accepted, of course, and for 9 months, actually, I lived in this prison where Eichmann was kept together with the 30 or 40 police officers.
What was he like?
Well, that's one thing. I mean, it's difficult, people are never only something. People are a combination of things. I prepared a documentary film about the trial. We didn't want it to be too long, so for 3 days and 3 nights, I saw all the films that existed on Auschwitz and Majdanek and Treblinka and on Bergen-Belsen, etc. And the thousands and thousands of bodies lying around and so on in the gas chambers. So out of fairness to the accused, we had about 45 minutes of the film that I prepared, and out of fairness to the accused, I wanted him to see the film together with his lawyers before we showed it to the judges. So the evening before we showed it in the courtroom, we had him brought there, and without the judges, and he saw the film. Now, I knew the film, so I didn't look at that. I looked at him. I wanted to see how he would react. So he was completely stoical, didn't react at all. But then suddenly he spoke in a very excited manner to his warden. So when the thing was over, I called the warden. I asked him, why was he suddenly so excited? He said, yes, he said that he had been promised that he would never be taken into the courtroom unless he wears his dark blue suit. And here they're taking him out in his gray suit with a great pullover. They shouldn't promise him something like that if they can't keep it, and he has to protest most violently against it. I mean, that was the only thing that worried him when he saw the thousands of bodies in Bergen-Belsen and the gas chambers, etc., which was also rather typical for him. Mm-hmm. But I'll never forget my first meeting with him. I was on that day reading the autobiography of Rudolf Höss. He was the commander of the Auschwitz death camp, and he was hanged in 1948 in Poland, 12 years before Eichmann was caught. But before he was executed, he wrote his biographical notes, and there I read on that day that he described how they had many days where they had to kill 1,000 Jewish children a day. And he described how the children sometimes begged for their lives, and he wrote, when I had to push the children into the gas chambers, my knees were getting a bit wobbly. But then he added, but I was always afterwards ashamed of this weakness of mine after I talked to Obersturmbannführer Adolph Eichmann, because Eichmann explained to me that it's especially the children that have to be killed first. Because he said, where is the logic that you kill a generation of older people and you leave alive a generation of possible avengers who might afterwards be also a cause for creating that race again? Well, that's not devoid of some macabre kind of logic. But anyway, 10 minutes after I read that, a policeman came in and said, Eichmann wants to see you. So when after I just read that about the necessity of killing the children, when I heard his steps outside and he was sitting opposite me a few seconds later, it was not easy to keep a poker face. But you could see how at the certain stage of the war, he became completely obsessed with this idea that he was in charge, that it was his war. He said to his friends towards the end of the war, I know the war is lost, but I'm still going to win my war. And then he went to Auschwitz to get the death rate increased from 10,000 a day to 12,000 a day. And when you speak of certain moments, there was only one witness in the trial, and I think only the one person in the world who was already inside a gas chamber. It was knocked, and he was able to tell the story. How come? He described they always had 200 children together, and he was pushed together with 200 other children into the gas chamber. And he described how they locked the doors and how it was dark, and how the children at first began to sing to give themselves courage. And then when nothing happened, the children began to cry. And then the doors opened. Why? Because a train load had arrived with potatoes, and there were not enough SS men to unload that. So the SS commander had the glorious idea, why not use some of the children before they're killed? So they took out the first 20 who were next to the door, and he was one of those. They closed the doors. They killed the other 180 right away. But then after the unloading of the train, they killed also those. But there was some reason they said he had done some negligence, and then he should be whipped before being killed. And the person who had to SS men who had to carry out the whipping took a liking to him. This is somehow he escaped. I mean, that's also a sort of moment that is almost very, very, very difficult to forget. There's one moment when I'm sometimes asked whether when you were if I wasn't at some moment very close to not being able to continue. There was a moment like that when there was a witness, one of the people who were in Auschwitz, and he described the selection. And he described his wife was sent to the left to the gas chambers. The little girl, he had 2.5 years old, to the left. He was asked, "What was your profession?" I said, "I was in the army, an intelligence officer." So I said, "Well, to the right." And then the boy, 13, 14 years old, and then the SS-man came and said, "Run after your mother." And then the witness said, "I looked and my wife was swallowed up in the crowd. I couldn't see her anymore. My son was swallowed up. I couldn't see him. But my little daughter, the 2.5-year-old one, she had a red coat. And that little red dot, getting smaller and smaller, this is how my family disappeared from my life." Now, I had a little daughter, exactly 2.5 years old, and I had bought her a red coat 2 weeks before that. Mm-hmm. And one day before the evidence, my wife had taken a picture of me with that little girl with the red coat. So when the witness said that, it cut off my throat. I suddenly couldn't utter a sound.
I understand.
The witness recovered, waited for the next question. The judges asked me to continue. The television was on me, and it took a few minutes until I managed to get under control again.
I understand.
And I must tell you, until today, I can be in a basketball stadium, I can be in a restaurant, I can be in the street. I suddenly feel my heart beating, and I turn around and I see a little boy or a little girl in a red coat. That is one of the moments that also is very difficult to forget.
What was the atmosphere of the Israeli people during the trial?
You know, at first when I was in charge of the whole investigation, I had some difficulty at first getting witnesses. Why? Because we had lists of survivors, and when they came, many of them didn't want to testify because they said that for years they had been trying to push this aside and not to remember these terrible things. And they had not spoken to this to their family, so they don't want to be reminded now. Well, I told them, look, it's your duty towards justice, towards the history, towards the Jewish people, that you tell us what you remember, what you know. Some people said no, some people said yes. There was also one I remember who said that, well, all right, if you call me, I'm the only survivor of my little township, then I'll talk for 4 and 5 days. You won't be able to stop me. Of course, we didn't want the trial to take too long. We wanted the witness sometimes only to cover certain things was not covered by others. But there was that, at first, that atmosphere. Then, by the part of some of the live witnesses. But I insisted that for every country, in addition to the documentary evidence, which was, of course, overwhelming, but still, I insisted there should be at least one live witness to show the atmosphere, to show what is happening. And that was something that really made an enormous impression in Israel and I think all over the world.
Yes.
That was one very important thing. You know, that our young people, teachers told me that many of the young people in Israel, the children in school, they didn't want to hear at first about the Holocaust because they were somehow ashamed. A young Israeli can understand that you can be hurt in a fight, yes, you can be killed in a fight, that you can lose a battle, that he can understand. But what he cannot understand is how hundreds of thousands and millions of people can be slaughtered without having really showing active resistance, etc. Now, that's not the main purpose, not the main purpose of the prosecution, but we wanted to show also our children that there was no reason here to be ashamed. So we showed the almost scientific way in which Eichmann and his assistants managed to mislead the future victims of the death camps, etc., up until the last minute. We showed details, how he forced the people people who went into the gas chambers to write postcards, to sort of misleading their friends and their families and making them go without resistance, etc. And never mind whether they were Jews or gypsies or Russian commissars or others. There's also all the intended victims were misled until the very last minute. And then we showed, like in the ghetto Warsaw, that when it was clear to the Jewish people there that death was waiting for them, they did rise and they did defend themselves, and they did create terrific resistance and were killed until the last man, so that there was no reason to show or to feel any weakness or disappointment or shame, but rather pride. Pride at the way in which these people acted. And therefore, teachers told me that at the end of after the trial, our young people wanted to visit the death camps in Poland. They were interested in hearing about Jewish culture in Europe, about history of the Jews in Europe. And that was a very important development. Another important thing happened in Germany. People told me, for instance, that also teachers, that there were always teachers who wanted to bring this into the classrooms, but they were not given a possibility. Why? The parents who were Nazis certainly didn't want the children to hear about that. But even the ones who were not Nazis, they did not want the children to come home and ask them, where were you? Why didn't you demonstrate? Why didn't you criticize? Why didn't you protest against that? So they also preferred not to hear about it. But then came the Eichmann trial, and it came to every home every day, at least 1 hour. So therefore they couldn't resist anymore for the teachers to bring this into the schools, and that caused a terrific development. In addition, there were prosecutors who always in Germany who wanted to bring cases against certain Nazi criminals and definitely those who were in the death camps. But they were not given budgets or a possibility. Then, after the Eichmann trial, that was no longer possible. There started a chain reaction of cases against Nazi criminals in the Nazi camps, in the death camps, and in the ghettos and in other places in Germany. And that with the German meticulousness, we now have, after the Eichmann trial, we began to get documents with all minute details of what happened in the death camps, in dozens of cases that were handled by German courts. So now, against all those who deny the existence of the Holocaust, and you have those all over the world. You have it in every country, in every continent. People who say this is exaggerated, this is Zionist propaganda, these things are not true or not to the same extent. So now that we have also documents from German official sources that show that these things happened and with the gruesome details about that. So that's another important element. And then, of course, the feeling all over the world that people who have that possibility to carry out genocide acts like that, that they should know that if they do that, they do give in to these orders and they do commit these things, then even after 15 years, as happened to the Eichmann case, there is a danger for them to be caught, to be examined, to be put on charge, to be charged with serious murder offenses, and then to be sentenced to the most severe crime known in a democratic country. You know that Eichmann is the only person who was ever sentenced to death and executed in Israel. We still have the death sentence for not only for genocide but also for terrorist acts. We still have it for treason in wartime. But even for the worst terrorist acts, no one has yet ever been sentenced to death and executed. So Eichmann is the only person who was sentenced to death and executed, and I think he certainly is a person who deserved that.
Justice Bach, my understanding is that Eichmann never denied doing what he was charged with, but his defense was that he was only following orders. What was your response at the time?
Yes. Well, we showed that it was one of the main points that I tried to examine, and we really could see that that is completely untrue. I found that in the SS there were lots of departments. Everyone had his leader, but all of them in the other departments were changed after a year or two by rotation. The only person who was kept as head of the Jewish department all during the war was Eichmann, because his superiors saw that this man not only carried out orders, but was completely obsessed and completely identified himself with this criminal scheme. I can show you, we had proof, and we brought proof in court, that he even countermanded Hitler's orders when he thought it might mean the saving of a few hundred. Hitler sometimes, not out of humanitarian reasons, but he sometimes gave orders, like in Hungary, that a certain number of Jews should be permitted to go to neutral countries because he wanted the cooperation of the Hungarian leaders. Mm-hmm. And then we had documents from German official sources that Eichmann was very upset when he heard about the decision of the Führer, of Hitler, and that he gave instructions to force the deportation from these places now at such a speed that until the visas can be arranged for them to go to another country, that no Jews should remain. So he even countermanded Hitler's orders. He also, during the trial, in his evidence, he said that this was one of the worst crimes committed in history. So I was asked during the trial, sometimes and after, and also later, whether I thought he meant this seriously, sincerely. That, from the point of view of the punishment, that might have been perhaps of importance. So I said, I'm sure that was mere lip service towards the outside in order to save his life. So I was asked, why do you say that? I said, I could imagine, even a man like that, after the end of the war, 45, and between that and 61, when his trial started, it is possible, theoretically and also practically, that a man's eyes could be opened, that he might change his opinion, that he might get a different view. I can't deny such a possibility. But here we had proof that in 1956, when he was already in the Argentine, he was visited by a Dutch fascist journalist who took his life story on tape recordings, and there was a typewritten copy of that with Eichmann's corrections in his own handwriting. So, amongst other things, that Dutchman asked him, tell me, Mr. Eichmann, don't you feel sorry sometimes for what you have done? And he said, yes, I feel sorry for one thing, that I wasn't hard enough, that I wasn't tough enough, that I didn't fight these damn interventionists enough, and now you see the result, the creation of the State of Israel and the reemergence of that people there. So I said, if he said that in 1956, 11 years after the war, and now 5 years later, when he's fighting for his life, he suddenly speaks of a grave crime, the gravest crime in history, I think I'm justified to be more than skeptical about the truthfulness of such a remark, which, of course, that was also accepted by everyone who heard the trial. And we brought proof that when there was sometimes a request by German generals who asked for a certain Jewish person, or sometimes a certain expert on radar, or certain experts on other things which were important for the German army, that a certain Jewish person should not be sent to the death camps, because it was important for the German army. So he even countermanded that. And he said, out of a question of principle, I cannot possibly agree. And he saw to it that all these Jewish persons were sent to the gas chambers. Therefore, you could really see that, as I said, his superiors, they also realized that here is a man who's completely identified with this, completely obsessed with the idea that it was his duty to carry out these things. like there was evidence in the Nuremberg trials that one of his colleagues, Mr. Wisli-Seni, he said that Eichmann told him that if one day I'll have to end my life, I'll jump into the grave laughing with the knowledge that I've caused the death of 6 million Jews. And this man, Höss, the one who I told you about, what he said about the Jewish children that have to be killed first, he said also, that Eichmann told him, if I'll be able to kill 10 million Jews, I'll do something very important for history, etc. So it's maybe not at first, maybe right at the beginning, he went into the Jewish department because he thought it was good for his career. But then, when he dealt with the murder of innocent people all these years, you could see that what developed was a complete identification with this, and therefore he was certainly not just the person who carried out orders.
It's interesting, Justice Bach, there were people who wrote asking for clemency after the verdict was given and the execution sentence was delivered by the court. Do you have any doubt at all that Israel did the right thing by executing Eichmann?
Yes, I personally have no doubt whatsoever. From many points of view, also the alternative of keeping him for all his life in an Israeli prison, that would have gone together with lots of undesirable things.
Yes. Justice Bach, did you lose family yourself in the Holocaust?
Well, we were terribly lucky. My father was one of the leading Zionists of Germany. And ironically, I went in Berlin to the Theodor Herzl School of Adolf Hitler's quest. But we were terribly lucky. We left Germany in 1938, 2 weeks before the, Crystal Night or Pogrom Night, when all Jews were arrested. We went to Holland. And we left Holland in 1940, 1 month before the German invasion. And we came then to Palestine on the ship, the Patria, which was sunk on the next journey after that, with 250 people killed. So we were always sort of one step ahead. But all my uncles were in Dachau and Buchenwald in the concentration camps. But my father, in 1938, it was still possible. When we were in Holland, he managed to get entry certificates to all these people to Palestine. And he managed to save the whole family. But what really afterwards gave me a shock, as I told you, I was in a Jewish Zionist school, the Theodor Herzl School in Germany, but in Holland I went to a mixed school, but there were hundreds of Jewish pupils as well. And my best friend, who was not Jewish, he saw me on television in the Eichmann trial, and then 1961, he called me, and we reestablished contact, and then he told me that after the war, he made some research, and he found out that of all the Jewish pupils in our school, that I'm apparently the only one who remained alive.
Wow.
Because all the others were killed. And then I later read in history books that between the outbreak of war in 1939 and March 1940, when we left Holland, Hitler had fixed 7 times a date for the invasion of Holland, and every time he postponed it at the last minute. Once the astrologers had told him the star situation was unfavorable. Once they heard something on the BBC, they thought the British were suspecting something. A number of times weather conditions were bad. So 7 times when there was a fixed date for the invasion of Holland, we were still there. And then the 8th time, when he did come in, we had just left Holland. So when I then later heard what happened to all my friends in the schools who were Jewish, the idea what life depends on sort of gives you room for thought. And all these years, we were only at the receiving end, and we only had to listen, and we only had to read, and we could never do anything about these terrible things that happened in Europe. And now that there suddenly was a possibility in the most democratic and justified way to adduce evidence and to bring before a court all the evidence, not only about the Holocaust, but against the man who was more than anyone else responsible for carrying out these ghastly offenses. And to be able to do that for months and to ask for the most severe sentence to be imposed upon him, I must tell you that certainly gave a lot of satisfaction. I must tell you also, I'll never forget the first moment of that trial, when these judges came into the courtroom with the Israeli emblem behind them. And when that man whose only purpose in life had become to destroy that people, when he got up and stood to attention before a sovereign Israeli court, before the sovereign Israeli state, the importance and the meaning of the creation of the State of Israel suddenly became clearer to me than at any moment that had preceded that, more than any demonstration or any kind of parade or any kind of article in the press, etc. But that is the sort of thing that I think was felt all over the country.
I get chills listening to you. It has been an honor to talk to you. You have been a marvelous servant both for the State of Israel and the entire Jewish people for virtually your entire life. And you were present at one of the most important moments in Jewish history. I wish you kol tuv v'hatzlacha, many, many more years of health and strength. And maybe if I'm ever in Israel, I can come by and see you. It would be a great honor. I thank you so much for giving us time, Justice Bach.
Well, I'm very pleased to have that chance of making conversation with you, and I certainly will welcome you very much if you can contact us when you come to Israel.
Thank you, Toda Rabba. You be well, and we'll talk again soon. Thank you very, very much.
Bye-bye.
And those are the thoughts of Justice Gabriel Bach, who in 1961 was the deputy prosecutor in the most celebrated, most important case in Israeli history, the Eichmann trial. We were honored to have him. As always, I invite you to be in touch with me with any thoughts or comments you may have. Please write me, email me, post on our Facebook wall, or tweet me. I look forward to hearing from you. Until the next time, I'm Mark Golub. Be well, my friends.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who can send a tax-deductible contribution of $36 or more to the nonprofit organization Jewish Education in Media to help support our programming. Tax-deductible checks may be made out to GEM and mailed to GEM, Post Office Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York, 10471. Please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD, and we thank you for your kind support.
L'chaim is a presentation of Jewish Education in Media.